Hello and welcome to a brand new show called The Real Estate Show. The Real Estate Show is where we talk all things property in this great big stone, which we call Zimbabwe or Zimbabwe. The Real Estate Show is proudly brought to you by Roson, Zimbabwe, and we'll be focusing on areas such as sustainable architecture, value addition, and opportunities for business development and growth in commercial, industrial, residential, tourism, mining, and agriculture. So we're going to have some interesting conversations with experts around real estate. I'm sure all of you locally and globally would want to know what it takes to buy property and why it's important to invest in property. And this is the perfect show for you. Today, as we start off the show with a bang, we're going to actually start talking about Harare, the morphology and progression in terms of development of Harare. And I think this is a very interesting conversation because I'm sure most of you have seen the 1980s photos, the 90s photos until the 2000s. So where are we now in Zimbabwe and in Harare when we look at the morphology and progression? But I'm not the expert here. I have an expert with me in studio, and today I'm joined by Mr. Masunda, who is the former mayor of Harare. He was the mayor during 2008 to 2013. I'm sure most of us remember this time as the time of the GNU. And Mr. Masunda is not only the former mayor, but he also is and was a sportsman, and he's a lawyer, and he's a businessman who has chaired in various prominent boards. Mr. Masunda, how are you? Thank you for joining us on the Real Estate Show.
I'm very well indeed. Thank you, Unique, for inviting me to participate in this inaugural show on the real estate in and around our capital city.
Thank you so much. So, what's quite interesting is, as we said, we're going to be talking about the urban morphology and how, the Harare city started and the growth trajectory. But I want to take you back to an interesting interview you once had with a representative from World Bank. And you were saying that you grew up in an atmosphere where community service was part of your DNA, Mr. Masunda. And you reflecting back in the 1960s when your father played a key role in Bulawayo, also around the city's development.
Well, when I said issues to do with service delivery were part of my DNA, what I was really getting at is that I had the privilege of being born and brought up in Bulawayo, and my parents were community leaders.
Right.
And my father in particular was involved in a lot of things to do with the sustainable development of the city. He arrived in Bulawayo in search of his fortunes in 1915, all the way from Manicaland,
Right.
Odzi, Nyazura area. And when he got there, he met my mum, whose parents had come all the way from the Eastern Cape. So I had 100% Xhosa mum and 100% Muwungwe father. And we grew up in an environment where we spoke Xhosa first with our mum, and then Sindebele second with our playmates, and Chimanyika third with our dad, and English at school. But the reason why I said what I said about service delivery being part of my DNA is because when we grew up, we saw a lot of people come and go through our house in our home in Bulawayo, and being assisted in one way or another by both my parents. And my dad, for instance, was not only a member of the then Bulawayo Welfare Society. And those days, there was no Ministry of Public Service, Labor and Social Welfare as we have now. So the Bulawayo Welfare Society was made up of prominent citizens who were concerned about alleviating the blight of the historically disadvantaged members of the community. And some of the prominent figures who who were involved in the Bulawayo Welfare Society included Benny Lobel, who was the founder of Lobel's Bread. And there were many other prominent citizens of Bulawayo who put their heads together to fundraise and actually help with the school fees for kids who came from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Right.
And on top of that, my dad was instrumental in the establishment of what was then known as the Bulawayo African Advisory Board in 1942. That was 10 years before I was born. And so there were a lot of people that used to come and go, through our home, including, Joshua Mkabu Gonyongolo Nkomo and Sir Humphrey Gibbs and his wife, Dame Molly Gibbs, who were prominent farmers in Nyamendlovu. And then Sir Humphrey Gibbs later became the governor of Southern Rhodesia.
Right.
And in 1947, my dad was introduced to the then Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland when, the recently deceased Queen Elizabeth II was only 21 years old.
Wow.
And there's a picture at which graced the mantel piece at home of my dad being introduced to the then Queen, who became the Queen Mother after Queen Elizabeth II ascended to the throne in 1953.
That's amazing, Mr. Masunda. Your background obviously has a rich history when it comes to understanding what community service means and giving back to the community. I want us to link this with urban morphology. Just sort of maybe explaining to us what is urban morphology and what does it mean when we're talking about urban morphology?
Yeah, you see, what was happening in Bulawayo in particular, and to almost a similar extent in Harare, was we started seeing the growth of those two cities, which were arguably the largest cities. Bulawayo was renowned for being the industrial hub of the then Federation of Southern Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia, and Nyasaland. So all that entailed was to make sure that the people that were now gravitating towards the city were properly accommodated in decent housing, and initially the housing that was provided was suitable for migrant laborers who were not married. But the person who pioneered all this was my mentor in later years, Dr. Edmund Hugh Ashton, who had come from Johannesburg, where he was the director of the then Native Affairs Department, which was changed to African Affairs Department. And when the Nationalist Party took over political power in South Africa, he then moved up to Bulawayo. And he, ably assisted by, amongst others, my dad, was responsible for coming up with a plan, the plan of Greater Bulawayo, which clearly indicated what was what and what should be built where, and so forth. And so that is the planning side of things. And then I also had the good fortune soon after completing my law degree at the tender age of 21 of working directly under a housing and planning unit that reported straight to Dr. Ashton. And my job as a 22-year-old law graduate with a lot of vim and vigor was to go throughout the whole of Bulawayo with this greater Bulawayo map, and Dr. Hugh Ashton and the three other guys that we worked with would have indicated, what's what, where, and my job was to actually go to those places and make sure that where there were supposed to be recreational facilities, those recreational facilities were there. Where there was supposed to be a church, the church was there. Where there was supposed to be a new housing development, it was all there. So that's, I think, the 18 months that I spent doing that stood me in better stead when I woke up one day on the 1st of July 2008 as Mr. Ordinary Citizen, and by the end of the day, I was the mayor of Harare.
That's brilliant and that's interesting. So obviously, you as a 21-year-old, you're learning all these key lessons, and I mean, we're looking at almost 20 to 30 years later. You are now the mayor of Harare. So let's go back to the 1980s. And obviously, I know you understand the morphology of Bulawayo, but taking lessons from Bulawayo, what did Harare look like in the 1980s?
Harare was a little bit more congested than Bulawayo because it attracted, inevitably, as the capital city, a lot more people than Bulawayo. But the significant thing, especially with regard to the sustainable development of the high-density suburbs, is that a lot of the senior functionaries in the then city of Salisbury were proteges of Dr. Hugh Ashton.
Right.
I mean, one guy that came to mind is Bevan Taylor, who was a superintendent of Mpopoma Township, and as I said, a protege of Hugh Ashton, and he came up here to Salisbury and became the director of Housing and Amenities Department. And so in a nutshell, I think what I can say about how Harare looked like then was that in virtually all the residential areas, you found that there were more than adequate sporting facilities. You know, Railton Sports Club, for instance, catered for employees of the then Rhodesia Railways.
Right.
And there were tennis courts and squash courts, amongst other things. And then there's all the Rarians, which catered for people that lived in the immediate vicinity of Milton Park, and then you had Alexandra Sports Club that catered for people that lived also in portions of Milton Park, and then Postal's Sports Club, which is now Belgravia Sports Club, was leased out by the city to the then Post and Telecommunications Corporation. And so the point, I think, is that there were recreational facilities, you know, whether it's sports clubs or golf clubs, dotted all around the city. And on a Saturday afternoon, the city was a hive of activity, you know. And one of the things that is a sore point for me, you know, today, as I see those sports clubs being turned into drinking dens, you know, and activities that are not remotely connected with sport.
Yes.
It's quite sad, actually, and it's an issue that I've passionately taken up with not only the functionaries that I had the privilege of working with during my 5-year stint as mayor, but I continued working with my successors like Bernard Gabriel Manyuchi, and more recently Ian Muteto Makone. And I think what we need to do in order to restore the city's past glory is to review where we are with regard to all these, not just the recreational facilities, but other amenities, and make sure that we go back to the drawing board, which is the Greater Salisbury Plan, and see areas that need to be improved upon, you know, in the full knowledge that we are now talking of Harare in 2023.
Yes.
And there's been an amazing growth in terms of numbers. And during my time, for instance, we used to cater in terms of the provision of potable water for the needs of close to 4.5 million people. And a lot of people don't seem to appreciate the pivotal role played by the city when it comes to the provision of services. Let's take health, for example. The city has been solely responsible for the running of 2 hospitals.
Right.
Beatrice Road Infectious Diseases Hospital, which is still known by that name, and Wilkins Infectious Diseases Hospital. Now, those 2 hospitals were established to handle infectious diseases like chickenpox, smallpox, and so forth. And the arrangement with central government was that for every patient treated by the city, there'll be a capitation fee of sorts paid. And then on top of that, the city was responsible for running 14 polyclinics,
Right.
and those 14 polyclinics had maternity wings. For instance, in Mbare, there is Edith Opperman Maternity Center.
Yeah.
And during my time as mayor, between 500 and 600 babies used to get delivered at Edith Opperman. And we really worked our socks off to make sure that the services that were provided to expectant mothers at Edith Opperman were second to none, compared, say, to what happened at the Avenues Clinic or any of the other hospitals in the low density areas.
Mr.
And then on top of
Masunda,
that, there was also an important thing that
yes.
that people aren't aware of, which was the the 32 primary healthcare centers that were run by the city health department. Now, primary health care has to do with the pre and postnatal services offered mainly to expectant mothers, and to make sure that the health assistants who would go out on the beat, like the constables in the United Kingdom, get to know how many expectant mothers there are in a given area and what support are they given pre and post delivery. So that's an area which sadly has been neglected, because we don't see enough health assistance on the bit. And the same applied to the housing inspectors.
So, I mean, I want to go back to one thing you mentioned when you're talking about restoring Harare's past glory. What was the goal and vision for the development of Harare in the first place?
The whole idea was to develop Harare in such a way that it could assist the country in attracting investment to the country.
Right.
Because it's all very well for us to wax lyrical about being open for business.
Yes.
But when the investors come here, the first thing they do is to find out where their employees are going to live and what recreational facilities will be available for their employees, what sort of educational facilities are on offer, because most of the key employees that work for these successful corporations would want to bring their kids here and live with them. So that was the whole idea, and so it's a joint effort involving a whole lot of people, not just central government or local government. And so we've seen a proliferation of private schools, and other facilities that go a long way towards enhancing the image of the city in terms of the provision of health facilities. But the key thing in all this is to make sure that on a regular basis we take stock of the numbers of people that have come in to live in the city, and then also take stock of whether or not the facilities that have been there since Grandma fell off the bus are still enough to provide the needs of those people.
Yes.
I mean, to give you an example, in 1966, when I was 14 years old, my parents didn't have any issues in terms of my safety and security. For me to get onto a train in Bulawayo and make my way to Salisbury.
Right.
I would leave home, get onto a bus. The bus would take me to the Bulawayo railway station. At the station, I'll get onto a train, which would depart from Bulawayo on time at 9 p.m. And my parents did all this in the safe knowledge that once I'm on the train, it will arrive at Salisbury railway station at 7:30. And I get off the train, not even cross the road, get onto a bus that will take me to Stoddart Hall. And at Stoddart Hall, I would be collected by the Mshonga family, who used to host me when I was here, and play in those tennis tournaments. And at the end of the tennis tournament, usually over Easter or Roson Founders long weekends, I would repeat the process. Get onto the bus at I'd start at home, go to the railway station, the train would leave on time,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. But today, you would hesitate, to expose even your grown-up kids, 18, 21, to that kind of thing. So the urban transportation system worked very well.
Right.
And this is all to do with what you call
The morphology.
the urban morphology.
That's interesting because you are saying that it's not only the role of central government that plays a key role when it comes to the morphology of a city or even a country. And you linked it with the health system, you linked it with transport,
system.
and you're also talking about investors looking at the education system. Can you maybe take us through key stakeholders that have a key role to play when it comes to the progression or morphology of a city?
All right, maybe let's start with the urban public transportation system.
Right.
There was a model that worked, and that model was predicated upon three things.
Right.
The city of Salisbury provided the facilities, if you like, the bus termini, whether it was in Highfield or Mbare or wherever, right? So that was the primary responsibility of the city. Then what is now Unifreight Africa. At that time, it was Salisbury United
Right.
Bus Company, and in Bulawayo it was Rhodesia Omnibus Company. So that company would provide the buses, right? And then central government, through the Ministry of Local Government, undertook to provide a subsidy,
Right.
to help if the need arose to keep the fares at affordable levels. And to the best of my knowledge, that subsidy never really kicked in.
Right.
So there was that symbiotic relationship involving all those parties.
Yes.
The provision of the actual buses done by these companies, local companies, which were part of the United Transport Group, which was a UK company that was listed on the London Stock Exchange.
Right.
And then the cities, notably the bigger cities like Salisbury and Bulawayo, Gwelo then, and Mtali, providing the infrastructure in the form of bus terminal.
Right.
And things worked. So there was no need at the time for anyone to want to own a car. But now, when we took our eyes off the ball in terms of that model, what ought to have happened following the advent of Uhuru in April 1980 is for the then Minister of Local Government to have had a look at that model and then say to himself, in what way can we improve the system? But, instead we saw exactly the opposite, which was described as the liberalization of the urban transport system.
Right.
So government instead, in its infinite wisdom or lack thereof, decided to make an investment direct into those bus companies. So you ended up with government taking up a stake, I think, of about, whether it was 49 or 51%, I can't remember now. But the bottom line is that the buses were now being made available for purposes of transporting supporters of the then Patriotic Front, which was made up of ZANU-PF and ZAPU. You'd hear adverts on radio and other media outlets. There's going to be a rally at such and such a point, and those that want to go to the rallies will be picked up at the usual points, and they're not paying.
Right.
So it didn't take long before the inevitable happened, and so the situation got worse in the early 90s when government formally introduced the commuter omnibuses, because up until then you had these chobambaiwas, as they were called, or emergency taxis, and the problem that then arose was how to regulate the operations of those community omnibuses.
Well, after the short break, we'll continue this conversation, interesting conversation with Mr. Masunda, who is the former mayor of Harare during the 2008 and 2013 tenure. As we continue the conversation, he is one of the men that coined the statement Harare Sunshine City. And we want to understand a little bit more about what this really means. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to the Real Estate Program, proudly brought to you by Roson, Zimbabwe. And as we said before, this is a brand new program where we'll be talking all things property. So if you are a person who is in the process of thinking of buying or investing in property, this is definitely the show for you. For our first episode, we have been discussing about the morphology of cities and, of course, especially Harare, where Harare was in the 1980s and where it is now. And I have an expert with me in studio, Mr. Manyuchi Masunda, who's the former mayor of Harare from 2008 to 2013. But he also has a rich history with him where he says that community development is a part of his DNA. Welcome back, Mr. Masunda.
Thank you. And I'm flattered, I must say, to be described as an expert. You know.
You definitely are. So, going back to you being an expert, you were the co-president of the United Cities and Local Government. Let's talk a little bit about this, linking it with urban morphology. Why is the urban cities and local government, such a critical role when it comes to the development of urban cities?
Yeah, the historical background of what was popularly known by its acronym, UCLG. Mm-hmm. It was actually a merger of three international organizations that had to do with the running on a sustainable basis of urban local authorities.
Right.
So the UCLG was, in loose terms, an organization of mayors of cities throughout the world.
Right.
So the world was divided into about 6 hubs, and I was fortunate to have been elected in Cairo to become, if you like, the president of mayors for the whole of Africa.
Wow.
So that happened in the last 3 years of my stint as mayor of Harare. And we were all inaugurated in Mexico City. Mm-hmm. And so I worked very closely with my other co-presidents. And the overall president was the then mayor of Istanbul, Kadir Topbaş, who was a world-class architect. And so the UCLG had its various SBUs, if you like, the strategic business units. And on the architectural side, on the road network side, and everything that has to do with a planned and sustainable development of cities. So you can imagine the knowledge that we drew from mayors of cities that have been established for a considerable length of time. The current Prime Minister of Portugal, Antonio Costa, was the then mayor of Lisbon,
right,
and the president of UCLG Europe, and so we drew quite a lot of precedents, from more established cities like Munich and Lisbon and London and New York City and so forth, and in fact made arrangements for the the financial engineers within UCLG to come out here in Zimbabwe and conduct workshops for the city treasurers drawn from all the cities. Because the distinctive thing about cities and towns in Zimbabwe is that they were all modeled on the same sort of format, if you like, that said the cities needed to generate their own revenues,
Right.
without any fiscal allocations, from central government. And that is eminently sensible because the cities sit on a lot of idle assets which need to be leveraged, to provide the much needed services. So in the case of Harare, for instance, just before I came in as mayor, as from the 1st of July 2008, at about that same sort of time, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation was engaged by the city to sponsor a survey that now constitutes, in my view, the Bible
Right.
of the development of Harare, with a view to it becoming a world-class city. So that in a nutshell, that survey split the operations of the city of Harare into essentially two. The provision of civic services
Right.
on one hand, and that's a matter to be dealt with by the democratically elected councillors, who are the ones that man the standing committees that are put together to run the city. And then there was the business side, which led to the formation of the Harare Sunshine Holdings as the business arm of the city. And I've been privileged, to have been asked to chair the Harare Sunshine Holdings as from 2018. And so that is the arm that now works very closely with people that are involved in real estate, like Roson's, the sponsors of this program, and the financial institutions. And there's a whole lot of things that are on the desk right now, drawing board, to do with the sustainable growth that has to happen, towards the eastern part of the of the city.
Right.
All the way to cover Manresa and in an endeavor to decongest the city, to stop everyone wanting to come and do something in the CBD.
That's quite interesting, Mr. Masunda. I'm constantly hearing from, what you're saying. You keep repeating the word sustainability. I want us to go to you promoting Harare as the Sunshine City with the vision that it will be world-class city by 2025. We're left with about 2 years to get to 2025. Let's link it with sustainability and the vision of Harare Sunshine City being world-class. What is your definition of being world-class, and what does Harare need to get there?
We did a whole lot of things, like to have in place infrastructure that can cope with the transport side of things. Getting here this morning was a nightmare.
Yes.
Because something goes horribly wrong with our drivers in Harare once you just have showers, And so what we need to do is to revisit the road networks that have been there for a considerable length of time, and see how we can broaden the road wherever possible, and come in with all sorts of measures that will help with the flow of the traffic.
Right.
And because I actually feel sorry for a lot of people that have to commute from, whether it's Marondera, Pindura, and other parts. All the arterial roads that lead into Harare is just unmitigated chaos in the morning. All right, thank God there's this work the works that are currently underway around Buzi.
Yes.
That will go some way towards relieving the congestion and the bottlenecks. But the point I would like to make, Unique, is that those are the incremental things that ought to have been done,
Right.
Post April 1980.
Right.
And the various incumbents that have been there as mayor or deputy mayor or whatever, you need to make sure that you do your bit and leave an indelible imprint of what it is that was done during your administration.
Right.
But unfortunately, a lot of the people that found themselves in townhouse had no business whatsoever to be there, because it's the nature of democracy. It brings out all sorts of unintended consequences, and which is why I took my hat off to the then Prime Minister during the Government of National Unity, Morgan Richard Tsvangirai, and Robert Gabriel Mugabe, the President, because for the first time in the history of cities in this country, the democratically elected councillors in, I would say, probably about 14 urban cities and towns were given either of two choices of choosing a mayor.
Right.
The first choice was either they stick to the knitting and choose a mayor from amongst themselves,
Yeah.
the democratically elected councillors. Now, in the case of Harare is divided into 46 wards.
Yes.
So there are 46 councillors. And in the case of Bout, I think it's 28 or 29 wards. So the other option was for the democratically elected councillors to look to the business sector, the academic sector, or the professional sector, and choose someone with the gravitas to be able to discharge successfully and effectively the role of mayor. And that's how I was chosen.
Interesting.
And so, as I said earlier, I woke up on Tuesday, the 1st of July 2008 as Mr. Ordinary Citizen, and by the end of the day I was the mayor of Harare, having been chosen by the 46 democratically elected councillors in Harare, 45 of whom were MDC, and a solitary lady representing Hopley, which is in Harare South. So these 46 of them put their heads together and chose me out of 4 other contenders. Contenders who were members of the Movement for Democratic Change. I mean, I've never been a member of any political party.
Yeah.
And I've got no immediate plans of doing so. But over the years, I've been fortunate enough to influence a lot of things in this country by virtue of my role as a senior legal practitioner, and also, more importantly, as chairman of many of the key companies that have made this country's economy tick. So that model, in my view, was potentially the best in terms of the way forward, because the other dispensation that came in at about that same time was for the then incumbent minister of local government to have unfettered discretion in appointing special interest councillors.
Right.
And the rationale behind that was to make it possible for the minister, if he discharged that unfettered discretion properly and judiciously, to come up with special interest councillors with skills that were conspicuously absent amongst the elected councillors.
Yeah, Mr. Masunda, it's quite interesting that you, not being part of any political party, you were chosen to be the mayor of Harare, obviously with your vast experience and knowledge. And you've been able to make a big difference, partnering with, world-class institutions to actually bring innovation and change within the Harare city. But when you look at 1980 up to 2023, what does Harare's growth trajectory look like since independence?
It's actually outstripped. It's beyond the imagination of a lot of people, actually.
Right.
Because sadly, we took our eyes off the ball in terms of making sure that our economy was growing in sync with the increasing population. Because if you cast your mind back to, say, 1980, the population of the city was maybe under 2 million,
Right.
but over a million, maybe let's say 1.5. And the amenities that were in place were designed to cater for the needs of that smaller number. So now come Uhuru, everyone is coming out of every nook and cranny in Zimbabwe heading for Harare. And a classic, a graphic illustration of the point I'm at pains to make was, for instance, at Edith Opperman Maternity Home Center, because we attended to the needs of expectant mothers from all over the country who would jump onto a bus in the safe knowledge that when they disembark at Mbare, Edith Opperman Maternity Center is less than 500 meters away. And as if that was not enough, there were economic refugees from Eritrea, from Ethiopia, from Somalia, Somaliland, you name it, DRC and God knows where else, who were transiting through Harare in search of their proverbial pot of gold in South Africa. And invariably, when these poor souls arrived at Roadport or Mbare, and if they fell sick, the first port of call was the polyclinic in Mbare. And in the case of expectant mothers who found themselves in labor prematurely, you know, the first port of call was Edith Opperman Maternity Home, which is one of the reasons why, you know, going back to what I would say the ideal qualities of anybody that has got aspirations of being mayor, you have to have empathy. One, you have to have a broad mind. So in my case, I had an open doors policy, which meant that anybody and everybody was welcome to come through to Townhouse and come up with ideas that were meant to benefit the city.
And I know we're running behind time, but you won the UN Habitat Scroll of Honor Award, which was launched in 1989, which recognizes individuals and institutions that have made outstanding contributions to urban development, including, you know, what you were talking about, something being in your DNA, improving the quality of urban life for all, and provision of adequate, affordable, and accessible housing. Lastly, as we look at this and as we look at the morphology of Harare and Harare's development, what does this mean to you as we look forward for a sustainable Sunshine City?
Well, first, I was honored to have been nominated and actually awarded this UN Habitat Scroll of Honor Award. And I found out later that the people that had put my name forward were the very same people that were barracking me in Nanjing, the members of the Zimbabwe Homeless People's Federation, because there was now tangible evidence of what myself and my team had done for their benefit. So the award was granted to me in Naples, Italy, at a World Urban Forum summit that had taken place there. But going back to the real meat of what we're talking about here, if all the things that are contained in the Friedrich Naumann survey, if we follow through on all those things, then we will be able to develop this city and make it a world-class city through the participation of organizations such as Roson's and the financial services players that are into funding infrastructure projects and all that we need to have in mind is the provision of adequate and affordable accommodation, and make sure there's provision of educational facilities that will meet the needs of all these professionals that we hope to attract to come to our city, and also make sure that we are not found wanting in terms of provision of recreational facilities. Because it's a crying shame today, Unique, that here we are being unable to use Rufaro Stadium for soccer or Kwanzaa Stadium. Those are facilities that belong to the city.
Yeah.
And even the National Sports Stadium has been deemed unfit for purpose by CAF. But we have to do all these things almost in tandem. The provision of, what I said earlier, accommodation, schools, and so forth, and make sure that from a hospitality and tourism perspective, we've got a lot a lot more to offer our tourists than most countries in the world.
Yeah.
Because we haven't eaten our animals, we've got some of the largest wildlife sanctuaries in the world,
Yes.
in Wange Game Reserve and Ngoni, and we've got Mana Pools, which has got what is arguably the largest concentration of wildlife. But we've got to make sure that when these tourists come, and I'm pleased with what's happening at the airport, because that airport has been jazzed up now and to international standards.
Yeah.
But we need to make sure that there's provision of adequate transport facilities, to ferry people that arrive, and so they're not left at the mercy of these extortionate shika drivers. And we also got to make sure that those that are into property development, there are nice hotels or lodges where these tourists can be accommodated.
Yes.
So it's a whole lot of things that are inextricably interlinked. But we've got to have a whole lot of these people coming to the party, and that party starts at townhouse. People need to make their services available, to the current mayor, Ian Muteto Makone, and his team, and say, this is what I'm on about. I'm from Roson's. Is there a way in which we can participate in the development of our city? Because like I said earlier, this responsibility is not solely, should not solely be borne by either central government or local government. We're all in it together. And we also got to make sure that the recreational facilities are built to world-class standards, like we've done, and I'm proud to say this, at Royal Harare Golf Club. Because Royal Harare Golf Club, believe it or not, is a municipal facility. But we, the members, who've been there from its establishment, I mean, I'm not in any way suggesting that I'm that old, but the Royal Harare Golf Club was established in 1898. And for quite a long time, it's been one of the top 50 golf courses in the world outside the United States.
Wow.
So we need to be able to bid to host these regional games, continental games, and even the Olympic Games, why not?
Yes.
Or even the World Cup. Because so far the World Cup has only been hosted by South Africa. There's not a single city in Africa that's been able to successfully bid for hosting the World Cup football or the Olympics. And those are sort of things that we need to be aiming at.
And these also increase the GDP of the country as well.
They do. And going back to this DNA again, Janik, I might bore you to tears about it. But you cannot expect someone who, through no fault of his own, was born and brought up in a rural setting, to then go to university, say at an urban area like you did at MSU or here at UZ, and that someone has to find work that's related to whatever discipline he was pursuing at university. But if that person has not had the exposure to all these things, he just won't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, at the tender age of 8 in Bulawayo, we were bussed by the boys' clubs that we belonged to.
Right.
Because Dr. Edmund Jew Ashton, who I mentioned earlier, made sure that in each township there was a boys' club, a girls' club, a women's club, and the men were allowed, to pursue their own, pleasures in beer gardens that were out in sprawling gardens like Harare gardens, right?
Yes.
But at the age of 8, I have a vivid recollection watching Roy Emerson playing tennis at Bulawayo Athletic Club, Yvonne Gulagong. now Yvonne Coley, and Margaret Smith, now Margaret Court, and Ken Rosewall, and Mal Anderson, and Pancho Gonzalez. These were world-class tennis players who were brought to this country thanks to Donald Black, the father of the legendary Byron, Wayne, and Cara Black.
Yeah.
So to have a kid who was born and brought up in rural areas, and I said, look, it's not their fault, right? But when that person eventually finds himself or herself as mayor of Harare, some of these things are not just going to resonate with them.
That's true.
They won't. It's not part of their DNA.
Yeah.
Whereas, as you quite rightly said, these sporting events can go a long way towards augmenting the country's GDP, and more importantly, putting Harare and Zimbabwe on the map.
Putting Harare and Zimbabwe on the map as we work towards a world-class city, looking at a sustainable development, and of course bringing in more investors. Ladies and gentlemen, I had with me Mr. Much Masunda, who is the former mayor of Harare during the 2008 to 2013 tenure, and he brought substantial development within the city. But not only that, he's talking about key stakeholders coming to the table and, seeing how they can have key conversations to move our cities forward. Thank you so much for joining me for this segment. But don't go away. After the short break, we're going to have a representative from Roson, Zimbabwe, to tell us a little bit about the background of Roson and where Roson is coming from and where they're going. We'll see you in a bit. Welcome back to the real estate program on our second segment, proudly brought to you by Roson Properties Zimbabwe. Just before the break, we had Much Masunda, Mr. Masunda, who is the former mayor of Zimbabwe during the 2008 and 2013 tenure. And of course, it being our first program, we decided to start especially by talking about the development of Harare, or Harare's morphology, looking at where it will or what it will take for it to be a world-class city, and of course looking at some of the challenges, but also talking about how key stakeholders should come on the table to work together to make it a world-class city. Well, right now I have with me Roson Properties Zimbabwe, who are going to be taking us through the background of Roson. Did you know that Roson Properties Zimbabwe calls themselves the neighborhood experts? And we'll understand a little bit more as to why they call themselves that. And of course, I have with me to join me for this conversation Richard Matengambiri, who's the managing director at Roson Properties Zimbabwe, to take us through the journey of Roson. Where did they come from? Where are they now? And where do they see the future of Roson? Thank you so much, Richard, for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you, Unique, and thank you, our viewers.
Fantastic. Richard, when was the inception of Roson?
Thank you very much for asking me that question. But maybe before I respond to that question, just a little bit of background. We started as RM Africa Property Consultants sometime in 2007. And the vision or the idea was we would want to save Africa from Zimbabwe. And then we also wanted to do business at international level. So along the way, we decided that we would want to partner or maybe acquire a franchise with an international property brand. And fortunately, we decided to choose or to go along with Roson Properties, which is headquartered in Cape Town in South Africa. So in 2010, we partnered with Roson Properties by way of acquiring a franchise, which we are running here in Zimbabwe.
Right.
Yes.
Interesting. So Roson is a franchise.
Yes,
And obviously the partnership has been flourishing clearly
indeed.
from what we can see. And you obviously saw a gap in the market starting
Yes.
in 2007. Tell us more about this.
Okay. Yeah, indeed. What was happening then, I'm sure you remember, it was during when the US dollar was recently introduced. That was
Yeah.
around 2010. And there was a lot of activities that was happening in the real estate industry, especially in the sales market. Yeah, there was a lot of activity, and also you find that in terms of the mortgage market, it was quite active back then,
Right.
where people were getting your 5, your 10, your 15-year mortgage tenure. And we wanted to capitalize on that boom. Hence, we decided to partner with a big, probably a giant property company in the form of Roson. Why? Because it's a brand that believes in marketing. It's a brand that believes in sales. It's a brand that believes in training its human resources. It's a brand that believes in research and development. So we wanted to take advantage of the opportunity that was existing in Zimbabwe back then. And what an opportunity to partner with Roson Properties here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you call yourselves the neighborhood experts, Richard. What does this mean to a person who wants to purchase property?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I think it's important to clarify such issues to the public.
Yeah.
In fact, there's something that I want to try and share with you, Unique. You find that when people are buying property or when they are investing in property, what comes first, or in terms of what is very critical, is the neighborhood before the actual property.
Right.
That's why you find when one is looking for a property to buy, the first question that we usually get is, do you have a property in Borodale, as an example? I'm looking for a property in Chisipiti, as an example, or I'm looking for a property in Westgate.
Right.
So they are talking about a certain neighborhood.
Yes.
So we found it very critical that as a brand, we needed to understand the neighborhood in which we operate. We want to make sure that we get to understand the social services or the amenities that are being offered by a particular neighborhood, so that we are able to sell to our prospective investors or prospective buyers. We want to be in a position to share with our market, to share with our investors the unique social services that are being offered by a particular neighborhood, the advantages that comes with investing in a particular neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because of that, we've invested in trying to understand each and every neighborhood. That's why you find in terms of our sales team, they specialize in a particular neighborhood. So we have got sales agents who specializes in Harare North, as an example, so that they get to understand the market trends in Harare North, in Borodale, as an example.
Yeah.
Why is this important as well? You know, knowledge is power. So we want to make sure that our agents, they've got the knowledge in terms of the social amenities that are within a certain neighborhood. We want to make sure that our agents, they are quite empowered in terms of the market trends. What has been happening in the past, what is currently happening, and what is likely to happen in a specific neighborhood. So that our prospective clients or investors, when they make an investment, they are making an investment from an informed point of view. Hence the need to specialize in particular neighborhoods. Yes.
That is very interesting. And of
Thank
course,
you.
now I understand a little bit more
Yeah, sure.
about what a neighborhood expert really means. And which areas do you specialize in?
You know, we are a proper brand that believes just to try and we want to be just to try and share with you
Yeah.
our vision
Yeah.
as a brand. Yeah. we aspire to be the #1 trusted property brand here in Zimbabwe. And we want to list on the stock exchange by 2030
Right.
as a brand. Yeah. So we have chosen specific areas where we want to concentrate or to serve our clients. And one of them is property sales.
Right.
Yes. So basically we are talking about marketing of properties and selling of properties. Yes. Then secondly, we are a brand that specializes in property valuation of land and buildings. In other words, we want to provide professional opinion in terms of the values of properties. Be it somebody wants to borrow from the bank, or maybe they just want to know the market value of their properties.
Yeah.
We are there to provide them with a well-researched, well-informed market value.
Right.
In terms of, so that they are able to make the right decisions that are well-informed. Yeah. Last but not least, we also do property development through our sister company.
Right.
So in other words, we can advise clients in terms of the best way, or rather the best and the highest use for their particular properties. Yeah. I'll give you an example. We have got quite a number of people, say in the Harare North, who has got large pieces of land which are just lying idle. And you know, the way we see it, sometimes we want to call that dead capital.
Right.
So if one comes to us as Roson Properties, we are able to advise you to say, you know what, on this piece of land, are you aware that you can sweat your asset by identification, or maybe by building clusters on this particular unit, where instead of having one unit, you probably have about 10 units if you build, say, clusters. So we are there also to try and advise clients in that respect. Then at the same time, through our sister, the company called 10 Axis, we also do what we call land and property development. Land development in the sense that we identify a vacant piece of land, which we subdivide, and then we value add by servicing that piece of property, by putting up your tarred roads, your storm drains, your water, your reticulation, so that people are able to buy and build on serviced stands.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's fantastic. And, you know, just looking at, you know, just before the break, we were obviously talking about Harare's projection in terms of, you know, its development since the 1980s.
Yes.
Where do you see Roson in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of property development and actually, you know, helping people live out their best lives through their properties?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I must say that the way that I see it, I think our future is very bright as a brand. Why? Because we have taken heed of what the government is trying to achieve in terms of Vision 2030, where one of the pillar is that there is need for housing delivery, there is need for infrastructure delivery.
Yes.
And we are taking part in that particular area, where we want to play our part in terms of providing houses. So currently, what we are working on is coming up with smart cities. Why? Because we believe that the future is smart city. If you want to try and do an investigation of what has been happening in the past and probably where we are going, you would find that taste has changed, lifestyle has changed.
Yes.
People now want developments that are convenient in terms of services. People want developments that are sustainable in terms of sustainability.
Right.
People also want now developments that are secured. So we are trying to make sure that going forward, we develop smart cities around Harare as an example, or other suburbs. Yeah. So what I can say is that the future is very bright in terms of my own assessment.
That's fantastic. Roson Properties Zimbabwe says the future is bright and they're on a path to creating what are called smart cities. That was Richard Matengambiri, who's the managing director at Roson Properties Zimbabwe. And thank you so much for joining us for this segment. And of course, after the short break, we'll give you the property highlight of the day and property tip, proudly brought to you by Roson Properties Zimbabwe.
Good day. I'm going to appeal to the sellers in terms of them getting the most out of their property within the shortest possible time. All right. For sellers to get the best in terms of value for their property within the shortest possible time, one, they need to give an agent a sole or exclusive mandate. That's number one. Number two, the picking of the agency is actually very important because they need to pick a knowledgeable agent who knows the area where the property is like no one else. Then in terms of giving the sole mandate or an exclusive mandate, it's very important because that allows prospective buyers to compete to get the property as opposed to giving a general mandate where agencies will then compete in order to sell the property at any cost. So the advantage of giving a sole mandate is to allow the agent to realize that there has been trust from the sellers, thereby putting all the necessary resources, all the necessary expertise, so that they get that one buyer to get that property. So it's very important to pick a trained, a knowledgeable agent in order to come up with that one buyer, so that we know the property is going to be exposed to the max, thereby getting that buyer within the shortest possible time. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on our first episode of the Real Estate Program, where we talk all things property. Remember, the Real Estate Program is proudly brought to you by Roson Properties Zimbabwe. And of course, I had with me Mr. Masunda, who's the former mayor of Harare from 2008 to 2013, talking about the morphology of Harare since independence. And he definitely had lots of rich history to share with us. And of course, I had with me Richard Matengambiri, who's the managing director at Roson Zimbabwe, or Roson Properties Zimbabwe, who was sharing with us the vision of Roson Properties Zimbabwe, where it's coming from, where it is now, and where it's going. And of course, their vision is to create more smart cities. Thank you so much to everyone who's joining us wherever you are all over the world, and we'll see you next time.